Hi guys, welcome to episode 22 of Fear of a Black Planet. I'm recording this, I'm wide awake and it's the middle of the night. It is, well, it's not too bad actually, it's only 20 past 1, but it feels later. Yeah, I meant to go to bed early and try and get up for, a nice Monday morning. But quite clearly, I just can't seem to force myself to sleep. And no matter how hard I try, I lie awake at night all the time now. So I just thought I'd start recording. I was going to do it in the morning, but I just thought I'd start recording now. Might as well, because I've got all these things buzzing in my head in no particular order. Just all at once. So I guess I have to talk about Bob Dylan and the Nobel Prize, but I'm not going to talk about it too much, other than to say the reason I don't want to talk about it is because he is my hero, and sometimes we can overshare these things. The only point I want to make is not actually about Bob Dylan winning this. It's about the fact that songs were recognised as literature. I think that's the crucial moment here, and people who are really angry about Dylan getting this accolade. I mean, I sort of find it funny actually that people are getting so wound up about it. Obviously, the nutjob fans like myself can be accused of overspinning the joy and everything, but equally the contrarians and the prideful skeptics who congratulate themselves on not falling victim to the mass consensus or whatever are displaying the same kind of cultish behaviour and automatic thinking, because they're failing to realize. A lot of it, the debate just keeps coming down to whether Dylan is a poet or isn't a poet. That's a separate question as far as I'm concerned, one which I have an answer to, but I'm not going to tell you. What I will say is that the fact that Dylan was honoured for bringing new poetic expressions into the American folk song tradition, basically, the American song tradition, or tradition of American song, or however they worded it. But the sort of most salient, is that the word? The most significant statement was from Tom Waits, I think, and his wife, who congratulated Bob Dylan, but also said that it was great that literature was going back to its roots. And I kind of agree with that in a way. I just think it's important that we remember that the novel isn't the dominant literature. Most people think of the word literature, they think of the novel or the epic. They don't think of the lyric. But actually, the epic is a bastard child of the lyric, and the novel is the bastard child of the epic. So people need to get their priorities right, and people need to understand that fact. That the original form of literature was lyric. Nobody is saying that Bob Dylan is being honoured as a poet, qua poet. He is being honoured for bringing poetic expressions, new poetic expressions, fresh kinds of artistic lyric into the folk song tradition and or the American song, and really, there's nothing controversial about that. If you really look at the wording, I think what people don't like is that it wasn't a novel. That's what really people are angsty about. They'd be okay if it was some dusty old poet, or even some dusty old, lyricist, someone who just wrote lyrics simply and someone else interpreted, Rabindranath Tagore was famously a Nobel laureate in literature, and he also wrote thousands of songs. So I just think the significant thing is that, and there's something. I think it's an advance that that's being considered literature, even though it's really going back. It's going back to the roots of. But it says a lot about what can be considered literature, and it frees literature finally from the weight of the novel. The weight of the novel is heavy. I trying to write my own novel, been trying to write one for years, and I study novelists, and it's when it's among it deserves to be venerated as among the most powerful art forms, and possibly one of the most significant art forms in human history. But the ballad tradition or the folk song tradition is no less a form of literature, and the fact that that we don't judge a poem, we don't judge a song according to strict poetic laws. We don't judge an epic according to lyric laws. We don't judge an epic according to the laws of a novel. So you can't judge Paradise Lost according to the laws of a novel, and you can't judge a play according to the laws of a film script. You can't. That's not to say that there aren't the core principles. I mean, there's the Aristotelian poetics, which interestingly apply to pretty much all of them. I suppose even the lyric is suggestive, and so I thought it was funny that some people, because I think part of the official statement of the Nobel Prize was that it's part of the tradition that goes back to Homer and Sappho. Homer, I'm not so sure. Homer, that's a bit more of a bold statement, because Homer is an epic poet, but I think it's Robert Graves that says all epic poets originate as lyric poets, which is typically Gravesian controversial statement. But as much as Homer is considered, the Homeric hymns, which I don't know, or that can be considered part of a tradition that's lyrical, then and I suppose what they mean is that Homer sung his stories. Even epic poetry was sung, so I suppose that's what they're referring to. But the Sappho thing is entirely true. I'm not a scholar on Sappho. When I read a few years ago, I've got some Sappho kicking around, and it's fragmentary, but all lyric poets or all lyric songwriters owe the debt of the existence of their craft to Sappho, a woman incidentally. And if that's another thing, by the way. A lot of people go, everybody, once something like this happens that's remotely controversial, or that there's any sort of scope for disagreement on, everybody starts putting their fucking axe in. It's becoming a little bit depressing. So there's the feminist outrage about no woman being on the cards for the Nobel this year. There's the feminist outrage, which I've just read an article in the Independent. This is just the male baby boomer generation backslapping each other, or awarding each other, all that kind of drivel. But it's the fact that they mentioned Sappho, and the fact that it is as much of an honour that the women can claim, as anything, and the lyric tradition is a feminine tradition, in more ways than one. The idea of a muse comes out of the lyric tradition, and the idea of a muse is very complex. Most people consider it now very fashionable to say that having a muse is to objectify. If you know anything about the concept of a muse, you would know that that's at least a very controversial notion, if not contradictory to the very idea of muse. So I just think, there's a lot of shite being talked about this, and I don't really want to talk about whether I think Bob Dylan's a poet, or why I love Bob Dylan, and why I think he deserves it, or blah 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 blah. I'm not even going to let you know whether I think he deserves it or not. What I'm just I just want to emphasise that fact that what the Nobel committee, or whoever they are, this Swedish Academy, have done is entirely legitimate historically, and anyone with a remote understanding of the scope of what literature can be will understand that. And as far as songs go, songs don't need to be these you don't need to write a song. Like, it's actually, I have found it's detrimental to the art of songwriting to try and be W.H. Auden. Let's just put it like that. To try and have that cemented cogency and terseness of line in modern popular song is pointless and unnecessary, and in fact alienating to the listener. Bob Dylan is being commended here and honoured for not being a poet comparable to anyone. He's being honoured for bringing into us a sphere which is at once more loose and more tight, tightly bound than any other art form, bringing in poetic expressions. Now, it's one thing to just like start writing poems and putting them to a tune. It's another thing to start using poetic styles and integrating them into things like the blues, or things like rock and roll, or things like hip hop. You couldn't just go into, you could rap iambic pentameter, but it would be pointless. It would be stating nothing. And so I think it's just significant to understand that a song can be considered literature without having to live up to the independent rules of what is considered modern poetry. So, I just think it's very funny that people have got this controversy. But I don't really want to focus on the controversy. I just want to say that I think that's a really significant thing, that the tyranny of the novel has been broken. And I think that's something that we should all be celebrating, not because we've got anything against novels, but just the idea that literature should be in some way weighty and intimidating and out of reach, and this massive commitment before you get any kind of give back, which is what the sort of novel presents itself as. And that's part of its value. There's something of value to that. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that's bad. And I was never a novel reader. As a kid, totally not a novel reader. I was a prose reader, but I was mostly interested in non-fiction things. Like how-to books and science books and things like that. Some graphic novels and comics and stuff, but I was never a big reader. I really had to train myself to be a reader first. I was a television watcher. But after I became a reader, I got into philosophy and those sorts of things, so it came quite naturally to me, the idea of reading ideas and philosophies and polemics, or, that kind of thing. That came naturally to me, but the novel did not, and I still have to work at it. It's something that I've really had to work off over time, but I by the time I graduated, I understood that there's a power in the novel and the short story that, if done correctly, is devastating. It goes beyond argument, it goes beyond non-fiction prose. It can do something that the argument can't. It can do something that the polemic can't. And Hemingway really taught me that, actually. Another Nobel Prize winner, I think, isn't he? Yeah, I think he's one of the guys that was listed. So it was really it wasn't Hemingway that turned me onto the novel. I'd read lots before. I guess it was the typical Salinger, Kerouac, those type of guys who, you know, people say such and such is a cliche, blah blah blah. But you know, the fact is, with people like Salinger and people like Kerouac, why they became so popular is they were writing, they were reflecting a truth of young people at the time, of the new generation of, you know, the simply was the case that the old social framework and model that was being handed down through education, through the canon, wasn't speaking to the young. So they needed, and I suppose Hemingway was the same in his own generation. But it really hit a tipping point, obviously, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s, and that's what Kerouac and Salinger represented in terms of the novel. So it was those guys that I started to realise, first of all, that I wasn't too dumb to read a novel. You know, I don't know if anybody's been following the podcast, they'll know that I've said before, I'm not a particularly well-educated person, not a particularly bright academic person, never was as a kid, always struggled, had extra maths, had extra English, you know, I struggled. So I come to this from a different perspective, I suppose, with the idea of the novel, and I guess it was Jim Morrison and not just his poetry but his songwriting that also spurned the idea that, hey, maybe I get what is genius about this, and therefore the fact that I get what is genius about this might mean that I'm not as much of a dipshit as my teachers are telling me all the time, you know. This is a different form that I understand, and so in some way I guess that's something that I feel maybe vindicated by this Nobel Prize award, not because it's Bob Dylan. Couldn't really give a shit about that, really, you know. It's more that the art form has been recognised as having literary qualities, that one can create literature within other art forms that are not literature. That's a huge, I would say, a good example of that. For instance, here's the thing. I think that Quentin Tarantino deserves the Nobel Prize for Literature. I genuinely think that. Not for his later stuff, you know, since Jackie Brown, I've not been so much of a fan of, and it's been much more visual and much more about entertainment. But Reservoir Dogs, and Pulp Fiction are, and to a great extent Jackie Brown, but Reservoir Dogs and Pulp Fiction are to a huge extent great statements about modern popular culture, and they brought a literary quality because they brought a writerly quality to script writing again, or not even, you know, it hadn't even been seen before. But also that it was the same thing as I was talking about J.D. Salinger and Kerouac. It's exactly the same thing with Tarantino. With certainly with Reservoir Dogs, I can remember the first time I saw Reservoir Dogs. Christ. I don't know how old you are, but I am of the generation I can remember when it came out, and so I remember sitting at boarding school, and when I was at school, there were a lot of the house I was in was kind of the house of the shady characters, and one subset of those shady characters, it wasn't the house where we were the good at rugby. It wasn't the house that we were academic. It wasn't the house where we there was a few athletes, but it wasn't. It was a house of sort of ne'er-do-wells and hustlers and nouveau riche types, right? And a lot of those were either sort of diplomats' sons who were into drugs and sex too much, or you know, guys who come from, like, you know, sons of oil barons in Dubai and things like this, you know, that kind of character. And they used to bring, you know, there's a lot of guys from Hong Kong, Chinese Hong Kong and also British Hong Kong, and the guys from Hong Kong were always dodgy. They always had a kind of Del Boy kind of attitude, and the first time I saw Reservoir Dogs, they were sitting in the common room in my boarding house, and I walk in and there's this thing on pirate. They used to bring pirate videos over all the time, And I think by this point, it hadn't been banned. There was rumours that it was banned. That was how we were told that Reservoir Dogs had been banned. But I think what it was is it just hadn't been released yet. There was controversy about releasing it because, you know, it was violent and it had this kind of dramatised violence to it. It was explicit in its use of violence as a dramatic tool, and people were uneasy about it still back then. And I remember watching this, and I guess the pirate video added to the romance of it. There was a kind of romance of watching things that were banned on pirate video. I did the same with A Clockwork Orange. It just, this sort of distorted image and just another sort of screen through which you had to kind of pierce through to get to what was really going on, you know. Which cinema has anyway, especially if you walk in halfway through a movie. This is part of the fun of doing that. But there was this added thing, and it was, you know, what's going on here? These guys are, not only are they just basically sitting around talking, there's more talking in that than there is violence. And the way that they talk is really how people talk. Or at the time I certainly felt it was more like how people talk, how I recognise people talk. And I can remember it's satisfying an intuition that I'd had as an avid TV watcher and movie watcher, that wouldn't it be great if someone could capture more of reality in this, that it wasn't always just Spielberg, you know. And that was the great impact of Tarantino. He was doing that, you know, in a way that art movie makers were not doing it, because it was mainstream. He'd cut through. He'd used, and he was using pop culture references, all that stuff that became cool and hip. But it was more that he was adding a dimensionality to existing memes, existing forms of gangster characters and things like that, and playing with them. And so I would absolutely 100% consider him as a filmmaker someone who could be awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature. And another person I was thinking about who could be, so it's not Nobel Prize for Literature, but you know, just to kind of show that the possibilities of awarding people that are not considered automatically within the sort of pure Platonic form of a genre, or that literature, or that different genres and ideas from genres can cross over and be recognised as being literature, as being poetry, even when they're not in the normal form. To me, as Bill Hicks, I was thinking, wouldn't it be great that Bill Hicks was given was inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame, because to such a great extent in the 90s and the late 80s he was really the only person embodying the values of rock and roll, the true values of rock and roll, upon which the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame was founded. The same reasons that NWA were recently inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. You know, and the same reasons that Public Enemy were, with, you know, it's totally not controversial. I think that it would be a great statement. Whether you like Hicks's comedy or not, that's really not the issue. I think that, again, it's similar to Bob Dylan. You don't really need to like the artist to recognise that someone can be commended for innovating cross genres, and that an award that's normally given to a certain form can recognise another art form as having embodied the values and furthered the interests of those people who partake in that form. And that's certainly what's being done with the Nobel Prize. And I would think that could definitely be done with people like Quentin Tarantino or Bill Hicks. And as far as the woman question goes, right, what, Joni Mitchell is angry that she's not considered as much of a poet as Dylan because blah blah blah, she's a woman. I think that's horseshit. The sad fact of the matter is, she herself has recognised that he was a huge influence. He just got there first, so it's fitting, you know. And I would have no problem with Joni Mitchell getting it, actually, because yeah, I reckon she probably does deserve it. You know, a really, someone who really has thought about the nature of a line, the economy of a lyric, those kind of things. But she didn't innovate it. That's the point. So there's no sexism there. Anyway, that's kind of my thoughts on that. I think I would like to see, if I was, to make my point. I think I can just say I would like to see Quentin Tarantino recognize his film writing recognized as literature. I think that shouldn't be controversial, and if it is, I think you're being narrow-minded. And I would like to see Bill Hicks inducted into the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame. And I think that these are beautiful ways of crossing. They're not just gimmicky. I mean, I can understand why some people might think it's gimmicky, to allow that, but I think there's what's so interesting about doing that is that you're affirming the underlying values of the art and the forms that carry the art. And the word literature is often used in a metaphorical way and can't really be used in any other way anyway. So in terms of giving someone an award for literature, okay, it could be overstretched, but if it's given proper consideration, as this has, Dylan was nominated 15 years in a row before he got this award, so I think people should calm down a bit. It's not a gimmick. I think what maybe the Nobel, Swedish Academy, or whoever the hell they are, I think what maybe they could have done, or what they could be trying to do, is to fulfill something which hasn't been done and maybe needs to be done culturally, is to recognise the spread of the idea of literature, that one can be literary in many different ways. And I think that's, if Shakespeare can be considered literature as a playwright, there's no reason someone, especially someone who comes out of the ballad tradition, which if you take the child ballads or the folk ballads, as they are written down, the broadside ballads, then you cannot. It's very difficult for you to avoid them being considered literature. Very difficult. I suppose another it brings up Robert Burns for me. Robert Burns, often this is what I was saying about how song doesn't need to be a poem, and a poem doesn't need to be a song for there to be enough crossover there. But with Robert Burns, it's really possible to be read. So much of what he wrote was possible to read both ways. A great amount of it is just poetry. But whatever songs he wrote or did versions of, when he collated all the Scottish Highland songs, they can all be read as poetry. I haven't come across one that hasn't been read as poetry, or couldn't be read as poetry, or maybe shouldn't be read as poetry. They all should, to some extent, be read as poetry, and I think that it's important. That's probably... I'm probably making a similar point to the child ballad thing there. Is that there is, up to a certain point in our history, before you get to possibly the blues and jazz, and then you get to Irving Berlin and all those guys, Cole Porter and all those guys. Up until that point, poetry and song was still certainly folk song and poetry was very intimate. So the whole thing with Dylan is that he was infusing these elements which had always been in song into popular song, and it was sort of bringing that tradition of the American popular song and the ballad together, and that's a significant moment That doesn't mean that they are considered poems, because you don't consider a Cole Porter song a poem. You don't even consider a Hank Williams song a poem, but you cannot deny that they're poetic, that they have a poetic engine to them. And I know, I just think there's a lot there to consider. So yeah, I don't know if I have anything more to add to that, because there's, again, I just, the minute there's a controversial thing happens, everybody's got to weigh in with the feminist, with the racial issue, with the fucking this issue, that issue. It's like, oh well, this just goes to prove exactly my gripe about and my bitterness about the world. And obviously, because it's controversial, there must be some white privilege involved. Let's just white male privilege. Obviously, that's the answer to everything. Yeah, piss off. Do I have anything else to say at the moment? Lots I want to say, but can I frame it in my head, off the top of my head? I would sing a song, but I can't. It's the middle of the night. I'll wake up my whole house. I had a gig on Tuesday up in Highgate at the Boogaloo, which was really good. And my plan was to just do my thing and piss off and get an early night. But I was on first, and it seemed to go down okay. It seemed to go down well. And then but then I stuck around. I had a glass of wine and stuck around for a bit, and met some really cool people. And normally these days I have been kind of avoiding social situations, and I actually felt, I quite enjoyed. I met some people that I genuinely enjoyed their company, and so that was nice. I was very glad. And it's good to play the Boogaloo. And it was run by this guy called Sean Rivers, who you should check out, who's a kind of filmmaker, poet. Really does it well, fusing poetry and film, which is something I've always aspired to do, but actually it's not as easy as you might think. Because obviously I guess one can dominate the other, but and you could maybe get too busy with it as well to try and avoid doing that. So it's very difficult. Like, you might try and sort of cut up and edit bits of lyric and, try and do kind of visual poems. I thought about doing that once, in this kind of sort of Joycean mix of the cinematic image or whatever. But this guy Sean Rivers, he doesn't even do that. He does sort of monologue style delivery, but it is essentially the image and the poem. There's no sort of complex interweaving necessary. It is the idea is always very simple, but I always thought it was very impactful, and I can't really figure out why, because, as I said, there is always a danger that when you fuse, when you put two forms side by side to make something greater than the whole, that one will dominate the other. So the temptation is to try and hide the fact that they are two separate art forms, but he doesn't even do that. There's very much a poet talking to a camera in a lot of it, and sometimes even with no real movement, or maybe just a steady cam shot or something. But it works, and I recommend his stuff, so check it out. And yeah, also I released my single, Days of Self-Pity, with a B-side called Goldmine Blues. And Days of Self-Pity, I try to think of it, it is slightly different from the last couple of songs I've released, which were very much definitely polemic, political songs. This has still got a political side to it, but it's not trying to persuade anything or tell you anything you don't already know. It's more just an expression of how I feel about it's more of an expression of a feeling, this idea of that we're living in the days of self-pity. I guess it's the idea is that we're living in this kind of victim culture, so it deals with that, but a lot of the hate and anger comes from that victim culture. So just increasing the victimhood and identity politics and all that, and trying to use victimhood as a leverage is actually just sort of increasing the hate that's in the air. That's my feeling of it. But it's there's a little bit more to it, because I talk a bit about science in it, and I talk about, God is dead, sort of just my feelings about modernity, and I guess it's much more in truth an observational song. That's the idea behind it. It's just, this is the way I see it. With people being shot and all these terror attacks that happened in 2016 and gun control issues, and just trying to put it into a bit of context, in a way, frame it in a way, put it all together in some way that makes sense, and speaks truthfully of how I feel about it. There was something else I wanted to say about it. Yeah, I guess there's also there's an element of it about the sort of sneering hipster mentality. There is a stanza in there about that. Just this kind of pseudo-irony, sort of hip, sneering pseudo-irony of, I've seen it all before, there's nothing new under the sun. I'm really attacking that as well. I'm really going for that, because I find that sort of intolerable. So yeah, I'm proud of it. I'm very proud of it, actually. Not because I think it's this most sophisticated song, or it's going to blow your mind musically. I think it's safe to say my shit will never blow your mind musically, but it's not meant to. I'm just trying to deliver an idea as elegantly as I can, and with as much impact as I can. So I'm proud of it, because I believe it's not just a polemic. I think I've managed to capture a lot of scope in a small space, and that's, I'm proud of that. And I wasn't necessarily even overthinking it. I was just trying, I guess, just writing what I saw, writing how I feel about things, which is nice. It's nice to be able to do that rather than force the issue. But the idea is to write a song and a poem every month. I mean, I've got enough for the next few months, but to record one and put them out every month, so there'll be something new at least every month. And other than that, I'm trying to get gigs. Just the usual, sending out emails, putting stuff up on websites and all that sort of stuff. Same old stuff. It's difficult. I think I've talked about it many times, probably. It's difficult to avoid getting disheartened in this game, in any artistic game. It's very difficult to avoid that, because especially if you're on social media and you're paying attention to the mainstream media, it's very easy to get sucked in to this sense that it's all wrapped up, that there are those sort of glitzy people out there, and there are the rest of us, and there's no chance to have an impact on the culture, and there's millions of people like you all trying to do the same thing. It's easy to get disheartened about that, and it's certainly true that in whatever art form you're in, there's more supply than demand. But I question the extent to whether it hasn't always been that, like that, I think it has always been that way, and that's just part and parcel of the game, and maybe it needs to be like that. Maybe the fact that it's so competitive or saturated doesn't necessarily need to be competitive in the sort of Donald Trump sense of competitive, but the fact that it is so saturated and at times overwhelming, maybe that's evolutionarily necessary. I mean, it's a process of natural selection. That we need that, you know. That that there's a greater gene pool, basically, for the real nuggets of beauty that human culture is delving deep to try and source. Maybe there's a force bigger than us going on here, you know. I don't know. I guess to some extent I have to keep optimistic, and I do get downhearted. I like everyone else does about this. You know, I do find it hard because I do want success. Make no mistake about it. Make no mistake about it. I want fame and fortune and success. I'm not going to qualify that either, because I don't think those are. In fact, I think those are the best ways to manifest what an artist wants in the world. You have to be renowned. You have to be well known. You have to have impact. Well, you don't have to. But for the kind of art I'm trying to do, you do. And I'm not going to make any pretenses about that. I'm certainly not going to make any. I'm not going to make it into some pious achievement to not want that. I think that if you're a poet or an authorial voice in any way, because maybe that's a distinction that lies in that distinction between being an artist and being a creative. Creative craft is one thing in itself that's mastered and is beautiful, and everyone has it, and everyone has the ability to master a craft. But an authorial voice wants to project their voice through that mastery into something, into the culture, for a bigger reason. And I want to do that. And there's nothing wrong with that. And while there might be a saturation of people mastering craft, there's not a saturation of people wanting to do that. Well, it is healthy to the culture to have resounding individual voices. It's healthy to the culture to have, even if they're negative, you know, Donald Trump types. You know, it's healthy to the culture to have the distillation of values spoken through one voice, because that's how one understands it. You don't understand it abstractly. You know, you don't understand beauty abstractly. It can't really be defined abstractly. That's the part of the problem with it. And neither can you understand many of the virtues, all of the virtues. Courage. One can only understand it really through example. So that's the individual voice in a culture is, to me, the engine of the culture. And culture is, to me, a biological concept. It's the knowledge and information of survival that's transmitted from organism to organism within a species. Although someone was telling me the other day, my mate Trey was telling me that that some biological forms can transmit their cultures between species, but that's a whole other thing. So I think that, to me, that I really do believe this, by the way, that poetry and authorial art, the individual speaking artistically and creatively, so something beyond just creative craft, but the artist as a lone voice, is an essential biological phenomenon that drives the engine of human progress and the engine of human flourishing. I don't like that word progress because it sounds too industrial. Progress. To me, it's more about human flourishing, potential, reaching potential. You know, that's the only game in town. So I make no apologies for it. You know. Yeah, it's funny because I'm literally just thinking out loud here. I'm literally just working this stuff out in my head as I go. It's not a statement of academic rigor. I'm always evolving this idea of the role of the artist. I think it's something that bugs me because I'm basically a Scottish Calvinist, so being being constantly paranoid that the artist is useless, that the artist is a luxury. That's definitely a word that was used in my family. In regards to art and ideas, that look, these things are a privilege or a luxury. I don't want to live in that world. I do want to live in a world where the artist. I mean, you think of someone like Shakespeare. Shakespeare was a working artist. The guy was a working player, a working actor. And by working actor, it's a lot different from the fanny career actors that you get now. He was a travelling Jippo, who grew up in the theatre, grew up in a kind of, I suppose, a sort of vaudevillian, Elizabethan kind of background. And so for him, it really was, it wasn't even, it wouldn't have been a question of whether it was of any social use. The economics spoke for itself. It was something you could make a living out of. It was something you travelled around, and people were thankful that you turned up and did something that took their minds off their shitty lives. And he took it to another level. He made that authorial voice more resounding, made a statement for the ages, for the species. If that makes any sense, something evolutionary. And that's what I'm up to. And it's not something I've thought of top down. Oh, that would be cool to do because that's like what famous people that I like do. No, it was. Here's the thing about my worship of Bob Dylan, right? I was already a fully formed human being by the time I came to like Bob Dylan. Bob Dylan did not reveal to me the beauty of poetry, the beauty or power of words. If anyone did to me, that was, in the rock and roll world, that was Jim Morrison. But it was the only thing that really, I suppose, just the sheer art of it. But if there was anything in terms of the idea of the man, it was more like a model of how you can go about doing that thing that's in your heart already. So nothing, if Bob Dylan had never existed and I'd never come across him, or I was just put off him too young, then I would still be the person I am. I don't, and that's true of anybody. Jim Morrison, Patti Smith, Hemingway. What the hero does is just give you a model, a model to go about that, of how to be an authorial voice in the world, and Shakespeare does that brilliantly as well. What was I saying? Was I saying anything other than that? Like, was I driving home a point there? I can't remember. But, yeah. So, I guess what I was driving at with that is just that's always been in me. That need to be, that aspiration to be that kind of artist has always been in me, and not just someone who's good at something. It's really kind of by the by. It's more the cultural impact. The idea of human flourishing means a lot to me. The idea that philosophy and ideas and beauty and creativity advance the human soul, not just not in a crude sort of mechanical sense of evolution. It's utilitarian sense. It's good for evolution, man. Makes things more evolved. It's more that evolution's a byproduct of the flourishing of the human soul. That's what it is. So basically, another way of putting that would be that your greatest gift to the human species, for the advancement of world peace or human flourishing, would be to reach your fullest potential. And there's no counter-example you can bring up about it. A lot of people start going, well, what about, like, Hitler realising his full potential? It's like, well, he wasn't realising his full potential then, was he? Like, can you really say he's optimising every frequency, of human possibility? No. So shut up. Nice argument, though. It's... Yeah, it's another example of what I said a couple of podcasts ago about the blurred line, like the false line between altruism and selfishness, egotism. I don't even think that the two help each other. There's just a false line. Like if you're functioning on the highest frequency possible, if you're reaching your fullest potential, you're gonna be, your cup runneth over. You know what I mean? And it needs to runneth over, and that's generally how people progress. That's the importance of having a hero. A hero is not someone you imitate word for word, note for note. It's someone whose cup runneth over, and once you do that, to say inspired is an overused word, but in the truest sense, you've given life to the sense of possibility within others, simply by being your own voice. And I really believe that's the greatest gift you can give to other people, because it's empowering. It empowers other people to realise how much responsibility, power and duty they have within themselves. Yeah, so midnight rambling from old Jackie Boy again. I guess I'm just going to leave it there, because again my voice is going. But it's good to get this off my chest. I find myself just lying awake at night, just like going over and over this kind of stuff. So why play by the rules of the world? If your brain doesn't play by the rules of the world, don't play by them. One doesn't need to sort of pour yourself into the mold. You part of that flourishing, part of that reaching your fullest potential is realizing that you can actually you can give a gift to the world by carving the world in your image. I mean, you can, there are obviously lots of negative people who've done that, but you can do it brilliantly. Gandhi did that. I mean, to say that Gandhi didn't have a massive concept of irony would be ridiculous. The guy, in a modern industrialized world, walked around in a fucking nappy spinning cloth, and by doing that was making the most ironic statement in the world. Reshaping the world as he saw it, rather than letting the world shape him, and by doing so changed history. It's that to me is Gandhi's achievement. He was a perfect example of that individual authorial voice. Yeah. Anyway, I will keep you all posted on updates, but if you want to have a listen to my song, go to soundcloud.com/JamesBlackfolk, and you can find the new release there, Days of Self-Pity with Goldmine Blues. Goldmine Blues is a kind of I didn't realise just how much the spoken word piece Goldmine Blues was actually very like Days of Self-Pity, because underlying it there are themes there about a lot of it's about the 60s revolution and how the modern sort of liberal revolution that happened in that we are the product of in our generation. I say my generation, I'm saying it's become moribund, it's become obsessed with identity, rather than dealing with the virtues that were liberated of those times. And I guess that Goldmine Blues is, although that was an observational poem of just the scene that's kind of around me, musically, it it ties in with the song in a way that I only realised today when I was thinking about it. I honestly just thought, I need a spoken word B-side here, let's put it out. And actually turns out that it's quite a coherent statement as a single and a B-side. So yeah, I'm proud of it. Go check it out. Leave a comment if you wish. And if you have been interested in anything I've said today, go to my Facebook page, facebook.com/JamesBlackfolk, and you can sign up to my mailing list. And I'd really appreciate it if you did that, because then I can start to create work for an audience that I know is there, you know. So, yeah, take care, have a good week, and I'll speak to you next week for episode 23. Thank you very much.